You've probably all heard about the historic flight of NASA's Orion capsule around the moon, the Artemis 2 mission, the first flyby in over 50 years. So now we're developing the capacity for deep space exploration, but truth be told, we have always been intrigued and enchanted by the moon. Whether Arabic, Chinese, English, Persian, and many other traditions, the moon was a living presence. So, what exactly did people in the past imagine when they glanced at the moon? To us, it's more of a celestial body that needs to be studied. But for ancient and medieval people, it was many things. It was a riddle, a healer, a prophet, a lover, and also a reminder of human weakness. For most medieval people, the moon was actually a planet, the lowest and closest of the seven wandering bodies, and it was thought to have been made of cold and moist qualities and linked to the phlegmatic type in humor theory. It was understood to borrow its light from the sun, which made it quite ambiguous because it was luminous but at the same time dependent, it was visible but at the same time very mysterious. This paradoxical nature is beautifully explained in two Old English riddles from the Exeter Book, which is a manuscript dating to around the late 10th century. Riddle 29 presents the moon as a creature moving in secret through the night sky. It is presented as wonderful in the air, whose winding paths are long to tell. In riddle 39, we have a being with no eyes, no mouth, no feet, no soul, and no blood, yet it lives, travels, and comforts many children throughout Middle Earth. This touches neither heaven nor hell. So both riddles kind of use the moon's contradictions deliberately. It is the most wretched of creatures and yet a source of comfort. It cannot really be known, however, it compels you to describe it. Medieval scholars also debated what you could see on the moon's surface. The French Roman de la Rose, for example, written in the 13th century, describes the dark patches on the moon as depicting a serpent with a tree on its back and a man hanging beneath the branches, a description actually drawn from the philosopher Albertus Magnus. Others saw a lion, and some accounts speak of the man on the moon, which would have been a peasant who gets caught stealing thorns to help him build a hedge. In this kind of story, the moon was rather seen as this place of exile and isolation from the community if you committed something reprehensible. The moon was thus kind of like a surface onto which the medieval imagination projected all kinds of meanings and creatures. The moon was also closely associated with specific deities across many cultures. For example, in Norse mythology, we have the deity Moni driving the moon chariot and controlling its phases. In other parts of the world, in China, for example, you will find Chang'e, who was a mortal woman who drank an elixir of immortality and fled to the moon, and she became one of the most celebrated figures in the lunar imagination. She was depicted on paintings and fans as a figure of feminine beauty, commanding her silvery world. In South Asia, we have Chandra, the Hindu moon god, appearing in Nepalese cloth mandalas. And in Christian Europe, the moon goddess Diana from the Greco Roman tradition actually persisted in medieval times, appearing in manuscript illuminations dressed with a crescent on her brow. In medieval imagination, people also traveled to the moon. For example, in Japanese literature, the earliest surviving fictional prose narrative, which is called The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, written sometime in the 10th or 9th century, speaks of a luminous girl named Princess Kaguya found inside a glowing bamboo stalk. She grows into this incredible woman of unearthly beauty, and she rejects all earthly suitors, including the emperor himself. At the story's end, it is told that she was called by a celestial delegation from the moon, and she ascended in a feathered robe, never to return. So, one way of reading the story is as a meditation on exile, as the impossibility of belonging to two worlds at once. In Italian Renaissance epic poetry, the Orlando Furioso by Ludovico Ariosto, written in the early 16th century, sends a character named Astolfo to the moon on a flying horse to retrieve the lost sanity of the knight Orlando. And on the moon, and I find this example absolutely fascinating, Astolfo discovers a vast junkyard of everything that was lost on Earth, meaning unanswered prayers, wasted time, broken promises, unfulfilled ambitions. These are all bottled in vials. So in this case, the moon becomes kind of like a cosmic rubbish heap for human failure. And of course, medieval people across many cultures believed that the phases of the moon, its positions and behavior could reveal the future or signal divine truths. In England, a tradition of lunaria, of moon books, assigned meanings to each of the 30 days of the lunar cycle. For example, if you read 15th century English moon books, you're going to find stuff like on the third day of the moon, it is good to begin journeys. On the eighth day, a child born would be quick tempered but will live long. On the 15th day, what a man dreams shall turn only to fantasy, and no business should be started. So you get the point. In Islamic tradition, the moon carried enormous religious weight. The cleaving of the moon, described in the Quran as a miracle performed by the Prophet Muhammad, was a sign of divine power. And as you probably know, the crescent moon became permanently associated with Islamic faith. In medieval Christianity, the moon was understood as a sign of God's workings in history as well. Pope Innocent III, reigning from 1198, for example, used the sun moon metaphor explicitly in a letter to justify papal supremacy, in the sense that the Pope is the sun, generating heat and light, so the emperor is only the moon, a mere reflection. But paradoxically, the church itself was also compared to the moon by major theologians, including Augustine of Hippo, Bede, and Bernard de Clairvaux, because the church, like the moon, receives its light from someone else, specifically Christ being the sun. Perhaps nowhere was the moon more practically felt in medieval life than in medicine. The dominant framework was something called melothesia, that is, in essence, the belief that each zodiac sign governs a part of the body, and that the moon's position in the zodiac at any given moment determines what medical procedures are safe and what procedures are dangerous. This produced the famous zodiac man, the Homo signorum, an illustrated diagram showing a human figure with each zodiac symbol placed on its corresponding body part that was found in dozens of manuscripts across Europe. A particularly lavish example appears in the Très riche Heures du Duc de Berry in the 15th century, and think that these were genuine clinical tools in the sense that surgeons and physicians actually consulted them before operating. Some moon books even give very specific clinical rules. For example, when the moon is in Taurus, don't give medicine to the neck or throat. When in Cancer, don't operate on the breast. When in Virgo, it is a good time to let blood and take laxatives, and so on. The link between moon and madness was equally palpable. The very word lunacy comes from luna, the moon, and medieval texts describe lunatic passion as a very distinct condition, and the remedies for this included specific gemstones like the topaz. The moon's changeability also made it a natural symbol for instability and trickery. Eclipses were particularly terrifying. For example, in medieval Old Norse tradition, we have the wolf Fenrir, who is going to swallow the sun and moon during Ragnarok. However, we also have some more scientific explanations. For example, John of Sacco-Bosco, writing in the 13th century and teaching in Paris, actually explained in a lot of astronomical detail the eclipses, describing the Earth's shadow as a cone. On the other hand, popular culture rather tended to retain the older terrors. Medieval tales also used the moon as an instrument of illusion. For example, in the Persian and Arabic tale cycle Kalila and Dimna, ultimately derived from an older Sanskrit text, we encounter a clever rabbit called Piros, who convinces a herd of elephants that the moon is angry with them for trampling its sacred spring. He leads the elephant king to a pool where the moon's reflection shimmers on the water, and when the elephant touches the water with its trunk, the reflection ripples, and the elephant believes that the moon is trembling with anger. So the elephants flee and they never come back. And in the story, the moon appears to be pure illusion deployed by the cunning against the powerful. We also have some texts in Europe, some anachoretic guides instructing female readers in particular to trample the moon underfoot symbolically, because the moon, because of all the waxing and waning, would represent all the worldly attachments that the devout must renounce. But the beauty of the moon also made it to the language of love across medieval cultures. In Andalusian Arabic poetry, for example, the beloved's face is routinely compared to the full moon. The poet Alcazaz writes of a lover who is simultaneously a new moon unique in its beauty and a full moon that shone in shapely proportion, proud of its beauty, desiring no increase. Another poet, Imsal of Seville, writing in the 13th century, described his departing beloveds as full moons which arose on the day of departure. In Persian epic, Nizami Ganjavi's Laila and Majnun, written in the 12th century, uses the moon as an abiding force in the tragic love between Laila and the mad poet Kais. Separated by their tribes, it's actually quite a tragic story. The lovers each gaze at the same moon, and this becomes the only shared thing between them. The Persian poet Attar, in the Conference of the Birds, written in the 12th century, builds the moon into a cosmos of universal longing. From fish to moon, all particles attest to him and make his essence manifest. So the moon becomes evidence that all of creation is saturated with longing for the divine. So, as you can see, the moon does boast a kaleidoscope of meanings, and they're all emotional and vivid and speak volumes about how we perceive the environment. It was a planet that governed your body's health, a prophet that scheduled your surgeries, a deity who fled to the sky, and also a theological symbol, a beautiful image a poet could reach for when trying to describe his beloved. If you want to deep dive into all these stories and much more about the topic, make sure to check out this book, The Medieval Moon, A History of Haunting and Blessing by Ayush Lazikani. So, do you associate the moon with anything special? Does it trigger any sort of thoughts or emotions? Write in a comment below, and if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing and becoming a member of this history project, mainly on Viking history, but also updates on miscellanea from the ancient and medieval world. This was Irina. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and I'll see you in the next one.